I think the vast majority of people who have joined have logged in, so that's great. So we're going to start. Hopefully you can hear me okay, and you can see the slides okay. Being a lawyer, my technical abilities are limited on that front when it comes to IT. Welcome everyone to the first in a series of health and safety roundtables, presented and hosted by the health and safety team here at Phil Fisher. This is our first one of 2023, which is great to see, and it's also great to see so many people registering for this, both old clients and contacts and new ones as well. So welcome to everyone. For those of you who haven't attended one of these before, it's fairly informal in that we're going to go over some topics today, but any questions or any points of discussion, please feel free to put a comment in the questions box, or if you want to come off mute and ask a question, that's absolutely fine. We've got an hour, and we'll try and get through as much as we can within that hour. I'd like to introduce two members of the Phil Fisher Health and Safety team who you'll be glad to hear will be doing the important bits today, unlike me. So I have Kirsty Imber, who's one of our solicitors here, has been with us for a couple of years now, does a lot of work on the health and safety side, and will introduce herself properly in a minute. And Christina Orman, who has been with us a little while now, and does a lot of work with myself and Kirsty in that health and safety work. So they're both here today, and they'll be presenting on various aspects of when an incident occurs, which is our first topic. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Andrew Sanderson. I'm a partner in dispute resolution. I head up the health and safety team here. Got a number of years experience in terms of dealing with clients in the health and safety world, both proactively and reactively. We spend a lot of time with clients making sure they don't have to deal with regulators, ensuring that policies and procedures are in place. But then when things do go wrong and a regulator turns up, then we're there to help the clients with investigations, with dealing with prosecutions, with making sure that we help protect their business. That's a massive part of what we do. As I said, today is the first in the series of our 2023 roundtables. Today we're going to look at when an incident occurs. Then in May, we're looking at internal investigations. June, we move on to the role of the health and safety executive, and September, preparing for trial. And this will then culminate in a mock trial on the 5th of October. So there is a theme throughout all of these presentations in that we're looking at an incident based on our experience, and then we'll have a mock trial in October, which will be at our offices here in London. It will be in our seminar room. It will be very interactive. I'm not trying to put anyone off, but it would be great to see as many of you there as possible, acting as members of the jury. We have some leading advocates coming in. We have a judge that will be coming in, and members of the Phil Fisher team will be taking various roles. It will be very interactive, and it will be followed by drinks afterwards if you need a further excuse to come along and see us. It will also be nice to actually do one of these face-to-face as opposed to virtually. So please make sure you register for all of the events we've got coming up. Any questions or anything, drop me an email, drop the other team an email. I'm sure we'll come back to you. Dealing with today, so we're going to be starting at the beginning in terms of when an incident occurs, what happens, what you should be doing when an incident occurs, what you shouldn't be doing, and where we can provide support, along with along with other organisations that we spend a lot of time working with who can also provide support as well. And we've got Craig Lydiard from 80/20, who we and some of our clients work with, and one of his clients as well, to talk about health and safety and also how we're able to support and what's out there in terms of supporting on these types of incidents. Workplace incidents, most of you are going to know when there is a serious workplace incident, there's certain obligations on the organisation and members of the organisation to make sure that they comply with various pieces of legislation in the initial part of an incident. As most of you will be aware, the health and safety executive will generally take the lead where there's been a workplace incident once the police have handed over authority to them. This could also be the local authority as well, depending on who has the ability or is best placed to deal with the incident. I think it's always worth recognising that there are the powers that the health and safety executive have in terms of dealing with these, and we'll sort of talk about these today and also throughout the series as well in terms of what can be done, what can't be done. I think the important thing is recognising that the inspectors, once something's gone wrong, the inspectors have the right to enter premises, start undertaking investigations. One thing I would say at this stage is we tend to get involved at this moment. This is where we're brought in, where the client picks up the phone and says, look, something's gone wrong. I've got HSE knocking on the door. What do I do? And if we can get to site, we do get to site. But if we can't, we sort of talk through what they should be doing, how they should be interacting with HSE. Being helpful is one thing, giving them the family stiller is something entirely different. And although people want to help in the aftermath of an incident, it's important to also make sure that we're protecting the business and protecting the directors and employees of that business as well. I'm going to hand over to Kirsty, who's going to start taking us through the process. So Kirsty, over to you.
Sure, thank you. I think it's important to say we've set out on this slide where the risk lies for an organisation. So prosecution being the main one, of course, and financial penalties, and these can be at the organisational level and the individual level. So directors may be personally liable. And actually, we publish quite frequently health and safety fines on our health and safety blog, and that will also include if the director has been found personally liable and the financial penalty. There's a serious reputational damage as well, loss of working days, decreased productivity and cost consequences. And then adding to this, it's the time spent dealing with external counsel. There may be related employee issues and disputes that are ongoing. There's the time spent updating and implementing internal changes to policies and procedures. We've certainly seen this with clients. So it's that work that goes into making the changes post-incident that can be very time consuming and costly. Andrew, would you agree it's an area that's often overlooked? It's not just the incident.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there's when an incident occurs, you know, that's obviously what takes the forefront of people's minds at that stage. But you know, in terms of the costs, it's not just the financial costs as well that you know they can be quantified, but the amount of time that's lost in terms of lost working days, management time, especially in dealing with these types of incidents, it can be absolutely huge. And I think sometimes it gets forgotten about. Yeah, it certainly gets missed, I think.
Yeah. We have the next slide. So we've set out some statistics for the construction sector, and that's where we've focused our case study today. And I think why construction? Well, it's a sector that's currently ranked as the most costly for health and safety. So that's with fines comprising 21% of the overall total costs collected by HSE this year. HSE do publish a lot of their figures per sector. It's worth a look, actually. So we've highlighted it. It's also frequently the site where different employment contractual relationships tend to coexist. This is the presence of contractors, subcontractors, other third parties such as agents, apprentices. So it's not always a clear cut. So as you can see from the figures we've got up here, in 2021, 2022, 123 workers were killed. And of these, they were in the of these, 30 were in the construction industry. It's the highest number. And it was falls from height that accounted for the highest number of accidents at 33%. These are high figures. And yes, just touched on, I think it's the post-incident fallout and dealing with that reputational damage that's case by case basis. There's no manual for how you deal with this, but it's not just the incident itself and any financial penalty faced as an organisation. I think it's key that we really stress that. And so we have a case study here, which I'll now hand over to Christine to just outline.
Thanks, Kirsty. So as Kirsty's stats showed, one of the biggest sources of accidents within the construction sector is fall from height. And we looked back on some of our experience within the team over the last few years to try and bring you a case study that's going to be representative and realistic of the types of things that we've seen. We're intending to use this throughout the series of Roundtable, as Andrew mentioned. So if you lose any of these facts after you log off today, we will remind you of them in future sessions, so there won't be a text. Because the nature of construction sites is such that we have so many different people coming in and interacting, we have built our case study around an agency contractor attending the site to work on a scaffolding unit. The agency that our contractor, who we've called P, works for, didn't supply all of the necessary equipment that they would need, in this case a lanyard, because they presumed that the construction site management would provide that for their worker. By the time P gets to the site, there aren't enough lanyards available for him to be allocated one. Despite having worked in this kind of field for a significant amount of time, P decides that he's more than happy to get up on the scaffolding and start working without the lanyard, which would safely tether him to the unit. There have been some issues in guarding the scaffolding, which is something that we see quite regularly in construction accidents. And so the kind of stability of the unit is compromised. It starts to shift, and when it does move, because he isn't tethered in, he falls from the scaffolding and falls 16 feet to ground. He loses consciousness on impact, and we know that he suffers fractures to his collarbone and his shoulder, which become relevant as we move through the case study.
So in terms of the complications, sorry Andrew, could we just go back to the last slide, just to say a bit more around the scenario and what complications may arise, apart from the obvious that we have an injured agency worker and it's potentially catastrophic. The employer may be unsure of their obligations in relation to this agency worker, if the relationship with that agency worker is set out from the very beginning, it's not clear. So the main question then becomes who is liable. So is it the employer, so in this case the construction company, or is it the contractor? So we've certainly had many situations where the employer is unsure of their legal duties when it comes to health and safety and where that liability falls. And that's, as I said, due to the complex array of employment contractual relationships there may be on any one major construction site such as this. But there are duties under the Health and Safety at Work Act, so specifically Section 3(1), and that's places a duty on the employer to ensure that non-employees and third parties are not exposed to risks to their health and safety. There's also reporting obligations, so who's responsible for reporting. Christine's going to take us through RIDDOR in the next slide. And some of these questions just haven't been clarified before the start of that relationship. And what we tend to say when we're giving more proactive advice is to really ensure there's effective communication and clear collaboration between the main construction company, the employer, and the agency. So who's doing the risk assessments? Are they aligned in their approach, etc., and so on? But we'll go over RIDDOR in the next slide.
Thank you. So the Reporting of Injuries, Diseases, Dangerous Occurrence Regulations is the piece of law that will govern the extent to which we need to be reporting things that are occurring in the workplace. There are a range of injuries and incidents and occurrences which are considered to be recordable injuries, which includes sort of longer term conditions as well. So actually something like repetitive strain injury or mesothelioma does fall within the scope of things that we need to record, because they are injuries and issues that are arising from a workplace scenario, even if they don't immediately seem like an incident that you might want to or might be required to report. Kind of coming back to our case study, things like fractures, any small or lower limb amputations, burns that would take over a large part of the body, if there's any loss of consciousness, even for just a second, if we have crush injuries in hands, these all constitute recordable injuries and will require reporting in accordance with RIDDOR. So if we look back to P, who's fallen down off the scaffolding, he's lost consciousness for a period that we don't know at this point. And we have fractures to the collarbone and the shoulder. So all three of those are recordable injuries, which means there's now a requirement for his accident to be reported under RIDDOR. Kirsty mentioned it's really important to understand who has responsibility for certain aspects of this relationship. So the only people who are allowed to make a report under RIDDOR are people that the regulations consider to be a responsible person. And this, in most cases, will be the employer of the injured person. But it can also be the person who has control of the premises where the incident happened. So if we step out of our construction scenario and there is a third party member of the public who gets injured in your workplace premises, you're not their employer, but they're injured in your premises. So the liability to have to make that report comes back to you as the person who's controlling those premises. We would expect in this scenario, in that case, for the person who's managing the construction site, so our construction company, to be the person who makes the report in respect to P's injuries. But we could see some conflict between their own agency wanting to say, well, this is our employee, he's our responsibility, we want to make that report. Or conversely, the opposite, a concern that if they make the report, that comes against their reporting statistics. And there's often a little bit of anxiety there, but in reality, even if you were to make the report as the agency worker, because the investigation focuses in and around those premises, it's the sort of any view from the agency would take that into account. So we wouldn't kind of necessarily say you need to be terrified of if you as the agency take primacy and make that report for your worker, and we can support you through that. But one thing, kind of going back to Kirsty's comments earlier, is just to make it clear, if you are going to be bringing in third-party contractors and agents, understanding what everybody's role is and making sure you know who's going to take what action in an incident, and it will alleviate some of those anxieties if an incident is to occur.
I think one thing I'd say on the RIDDOR point is that we often get a lot of clients who will deal with the initial incident, and then in terms of the RIDDOR reporting, sometimes it gets forgotten, or people are unsure about who should actually be doing that, or if a RIDDOR report is required, and sometimes it can get lost in the whole sort of aftermath. And I think it's important we sit down with clients and do incident response training. I think it's important to sort of make sure that whoever within the organisation is the responsible person, the responsible persons, that they're sort of taking the lead in terms of doing this to make sure it doesn't get forgotten about. And more importantly, is that it's filed in the right way, and that it's kept in terms of the information that's provided, it's accurate and succinct.
That brings us on to the first 60 minutes, that crucial first hour. And we can't really emphasize this enough. And I think something terrible happens in the workplace. And of course, it's human instinct to panic. But of course, there might be emergency action that needs to take place. There's maybe administering first aid, calling the emergency services, etc. But I think trying to apply a fairly systematic approach to this first 6 minutes is very key. I mean, we've had to assist clients that just haven't got such a process in place and have panicked and made some mistakes and have engaged us probably not at the right time, and we've had to really go back and try and piece together what has happened, where are the gaps. And that's why it's important, and Andrew will touch on this in the summary slides later on, just to prepare for the worst and have a protocol in place that then you practice and that you go through, do a mock incident. But in terms of our scenario, obviously with such a fall, we'd expect there to be first aid and emergency services to be called, and ensuring the area is safe as well, so to prevent any further injury. And it may be that you look, well, what other workers do we have that are working in a similar unsafe way? And also assisting the emergency services if they are able to arrive at a reasonable time to assist. And try to stay calm and collected and look at the scene and starting to inspect and document. This is the crucial part, as Andrew has just touched on. What we don't want is to have to go back and retrospectively start looking at what was the situation, where there witnesses, what were other people doing. Making a record and having that accuracy from the very beginning is key. And that's where we would advise engaging external legal assistance, particularly as we've got this scenario where there's a bit of a grey area with the contractual relationships. I think we found this, haven't we, quite a few of our situated with our clients, that they're just a bit unsure and therefore they don't do anything, and sometimes it's actually worse.
Yeah, I think you have a situation where people are almost afraid to do something because they're worried about if they do something, are they the right organisation to be doing it? Are they going to provide the right information? And it almost, everyone's paralysed in terms of getting stuff done. And that's why we, like I said earlier, we spend a lot of time on incident response training with clients so that people know what their roles and responsibilities are. It almost becomes second nature. One thing I would emphasise, which Kirsty mentioned, is the second point, ensure the area is made safe to prevent further injury. Some of you probably wouldn't be surprised at the number of times where an area hasn't been made safe after an incident, and then there are further injuries that are caused as a direct result of that. It's really, really important. It sounds simple, just like calling the emergency services, but when people are in that scenario, the number of times that it's forgotten is more than it should be.
And I think probably from my perspective, it's echoing some of the things that Andrew and Kirsty said. It's trying to keep that level head and approach this really methodically. Kirsty mentioned making sure that we've got the inspections that we need, keeping a log of what's happened, trying to take contemporaneous notes. It's also really important to keep hold of those notes and all that evidence somewhere safe, because if you then kind of come in to try and assess everything that's happened, those contemporaneous notes sort of aren't really worth very much if they got put in the back of someone's van and they've gone to a different site and nobody knows where they are anymore. Collaboration and communication are going to be key in these first 60 minutes and moving forward through the first couple of days of incident response. In P's case, we have his agency. Somebody needs to be making sure that they are contacting his agency to say an incident has occurred. This is what we think it is. This is the action that we've taken so far, and ensure that those two stakeholders in P's injury are approaching this in the same way and they're coordinating and they're working collaboratively. There's no point starting to point fingers and say, well, you thought he would have a lanyard and I thought he would have a lanyard and he hasn't got any. Right now, we need to look at what you can do collaboratively and how we can sort of work well and keep a clear head. And Andrew mentioned communication with the regulator is going to be really key.
I think the other point to make, and this is personal experience of mine of working with a client, and it wasn't clear to them because of their role in the organisation what our role actually was. So we were investigating for them and on behalf of them, but this particular individual wasn't sure of the process and actually held back quite a lot of information. So I think it's key that if external legal counsel are engaged early on, it's making our role clear and just trying to put them at ease and their organisation at ease and employees that actually any role that we take on, the investigations we do are purely for their benefit to assist them. Because sometimes the lawyers walk in and there's a sense of, well, are we in trouble? You know, what should we say? But it's key that trust and that rapport is built very early on, I would say.
And I think I would say, as someone who has been on the client side of things, looking at working with the external counsel, it's so important to just be able to communicate with you and to trust you. You are the subject matter experts for this. So knowing that I can pick up the phone and say, Kirsty, this is what's happened, what happens next, come and talk to my people, and knowing that there's a team of experts who will support that brings a lot of kind of comfort in the anxious moment, I would say.
I should have said, Christine comes from, although now works for us here at Field Vision, was a client of Field Vision's prior to that. So sort of seeing both sides really. So it's quite interesting hearing that from the client point of view, I think. One thing I would say is that whatever an organisation does in those initial minutes, hours after an incident can have a massive bearing further down the line. If you do things in the right way in those initial hours and minutes, it is gonna help you tenfold further down the line, keeping hold of notes of what documents have been requested by HSE, what's been actually given to them. And if they're taking away documentation, actually asking for copies of that before they're removed from site, because that will help further down the line. Also, in terms of liaising with families of anyone who's injured, helping them in the initial aftermath. Again, from an organisation point of view, you can have massive benefits. And it's also, as we say to clients, it's the right thing to do. Sort of pulling down the shutters and locking the doors is not the right thing to do. Engaging in the right way is definitely what we should be doing, what we encourage clients to do. Just before I move on to sort of a few key takeaways, is there any questions or comments from anyone just in terms of what we've covered there? I'll do my best to dig them out of the questions box, or if anyone wants to come off mute, more than happy to do that. Oh, Victoria, thank you for your question. So Victoria asked the question: does it really matter who reports RIDDOR as long as it's done? I would always expect the employer to do it, but would expect to be provided with evidence that hasn't been done. Victoria, it's a really big question. I mean, first of all, it's got to be done. It's got to be done by the right person or groups of people within the organisation. I think we can get too hung up in who should do it, who shouldn't do it, and what we say to a lot of clients will say to who is responsible within your team for RIDDOR reporting. Most clients have something in place whereby somebody who's within the health and safety team or management team have experience and are used to dealing with this. So it's important that it's done by the right person. I think for me the biggest thing there is it's important that the right information is provided at that time. It has to be clear, it has to be concise, and it has to be accurate. We often have situations whereby RIDDOR reporting has been done the wrong way, and that can lead to confusion in the future. So it's the wrong site, or there's a reference to something that's not relevant, and that can cause confusion. So a lot of clients, a lot of organisations have their own systems in place. I don't know if anyone else has got any questions or comments they would like to raise now. So in terms of the sort of key takeaways for this sort of part of our discussion, having in place the right health and safety policies and processes is absolutely crucial, but also it's really important that the incident response policy process is is up to date, actually works, that the organisation has run through this before. There's nothing worse, and something that we see is where organisations spend a lot of time and a lot of money introducing policies and procedures in this area, and they're in a very nice bundle on the shelf, and they're not used, they're not updated, and more importantly, nobody really knows about them. So it's important that people know they're there and what their roles are, more importantly. Making sure that the organisation has taken part in incident response training. We often do this in a three-handed way between ourselves, the clients, so the client team, the health and safety team, the senior management team there, and also insurers as well. So the insurers, getting the insurers involved at an early stage can be beneficial in that sort of providing assistance on the ground can be done through that way. So making sure people understand what their roles and responsibilities are is key, because there's nothing worse than people either trying to undertake more than they need to, or alternatively, sort of people not knowing who should be involved. The penultimate bullet point there is obviously a plug in terms of Phil Fisher. We do act as external health and safety lawyers to a lot of clients. We provide incident response to them, which is where the client can phone up 24/7. They come through on a dedicated line to the Phil Fisher team. And that means we're able to help with those initial stages. We're able to provide a degree of comfort and a degree of hand-holding. And also, more importantly, what we're able to do is we're able to provide a little bit of a shield between the organisation, our clients, and any investigators, whether that's the HSE or other agencies. So we're helping to protect you whilst also helping in terms of those agencies getting the information that they need to get hold of, and also providing assistance in terms of comms as well. So we work with various companies that are able to help with that. I think one question I'd sort of say for people to take away, what difficulties does your organisation encounter when it comes to incident response policies and protocols? I think this is always a good one to have in the back of your mind in terms of, just going back over, maybe after this or later, in the month, going back over and having a look at what you've got in place. Does it work? Is it fit for purpose? Do we need to have a look at it? Do we maybe need to update it? Something that often happens is people leave organisations and their roles and responsibilities aren't reallocated. I think that's absolutely crucial that you keep it under review. It's always the approach we adopt is here within the health and safety team is sort of saying to clients preparing for the worst scenario, and it's not being melodramatic, it's not overrating it. It's very much if we as a team, as in Phil Fisher, the client, the insurers, whoever else is involved, prepare for the worst, and if there's an incident that happens, people automatically get into their right roles, get into their rights, get into the right frame of mind in terms of dealing with that incident. It also helps in terms of how they respond as well. They're used to responding, so preparing for the worst absolutely helps in terms of health and safety. The 4 bullet points we've got at the end there, I think most health and safety professionals, and I know there are some on the call today, it's almost a revolving sort of learning exercise in terms of reviewing your health and safety policy. Is it fit for purpose? Do we need help? Do we need people to come in? Do we need to redo assessments? Incident response policies and protocols again sort of sits alongside that in terms of keeping it up to date. And I know all this sounds a horrendous amount of work. But if it's reviewed and updated on a regular basis, then it becomes less and less onerous. The risk assessment process fits into that, and the incident mock trial exercise, again, I think this works really well. We've often spent a day with a client and we've run through a scenario of a mock incident, how do they respond, who's doing what in the business, and the number of things that come out of that is learning and areas that sort of people need to work on is very, very interesting. And it's getting those right when the pressure's not on is good. When the pressure's on, there will be things that go wrong. There always are, but if we can minimise those, that's great. My worst scenario is where we have an incident and the individual thinking they're helping hands over every single piece of paperwork to the HSE, and we've then got a problem in terms of rowing back from that. From our sort of point of view, we're sat here as lawyers. We're not health and safety professionals. We're health and safety lawyers with a lot of experience, but we're not there to do risk assessments and that sort of thing. And I'm really pleased today that we've got a friend of the firm's, Craig Vidiots from 80/20 Risk, who's going to just talk through a little bit of the support that he's provided to the Phil Fisher team here, and also, more importantly, some backlines. And Craig's also got one of his clients who's joined us as well, Abigail. He's going to talk through from their perspective how it works. Craig, are you able to join us now?
I hope so. Can you hear me?
We can.
Excellent. Well, good afternoon, folks. I won't keep you long, but what I want to do is to pick up on the points that the Phil Fisher team were making about records, defensibility, joined up approaches. What we provide is a cloud-based software platform, and it's a shameless plug, and I don't apologize. So what we do is this, and what we do is we give the basics of the proactivity for the clients, which I think is really, really key. You get it right at the beginning. There's less to actually mop up at the back end. And to pick up on Andrew's point about not giving away the family silver, at the same time, when a regulator, when somebody wants to see the records, what we provide is the platform that lets you do that. And all I can say to you is the reaction from law firms, from the regulators, to getting the information that they've actually requested in a timely manner, compared to I've no idea where that is, but let me look for it, is very, very different. So we have joined up a seamless platform that lets clients manage health and safety in its widest sense, from risk assessments to policies, etc., etc. But I thought what would be really, really useful, and I'm actually delighted that Abigail Leake is joining us. I would define Abigail as our power user of power users. She's taken our system to a very, very impressive place, and it sort of talks to your case study as well, because Abby works for a company called Trinity are the CMO, the construction management organization for Cadent Gas in the West Midlands. Really, really complex process full of lots of subcontractors or supply chain contractors, and what they've done with our system is to, I think, give the best of actually both worlds. Really, really solid, proactive, and extremely reactive and fast response if they need that. So I thought, rather than me tell you how great that we are, I thought it would be really, really cool if Abby could just run through what she's done with the system and how she feels, because it talks about, we are a construction business, that's what we're talking about, what she feels that the system has helped them to achieve. So Abby.
I guess that's my cue. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. We're all working. Thank you for that introduction. That's very, very nice. They like to toot my own horn quite a lot because, yeah, I have taken their system and kind of molded it to exactly what we need, and it's been very, very impressive. But I think they need to toot their own horn a little bit because I couldn't have done it without them. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a bit about how. So basically, we work for Cadent Gas in the West Midlands. And we use E20 for basically everything, all our safety data management, including analysis and assurance of incidents, hazards, near misses, including positive observations, where they've done something really positive out on site, risk assessments, checklists, site audits, permits, God knows what else. Yeah, so we then use it for like storage of safety management system document libraries, which Craig touched on. It's a safety management system, and we can use it for action tracking and complete company and supply chain competency matrix. So it's like everything in one package. So it's proved vital for tracking our safety performance across the board, and it's so user friendly. Just to make a form, honestly, people are so shocked with how quickly I can turn stuff around. I'm like, oh, is that going to take you like a week, 2 weeks? I'm like, it's going to take me less than an hour. Like, so it's made training people on the system really easy, because that's whenever we get someone new in, we have to train them up on the system, which doesn't really take a lot anyway. But yeah, it's just made that a whole lot smoother. And it's opened my eyes to just how valuable data is and can be in a company that's so revolved around safety. I believe safety data is probably one of the most important things, coming from a safety background myself. And it's integrated with a management information tool, Google Data Studio. So making and creating and maintaining dashboards to show exactly what I want. Yeah, it's just proved vital. I can do it in my sleep, honestly. But a little bit more about like what we use it for. We can prove our findings out on site against other departments. So as a safety department, we're supposed to be, although managing safety, it's also managing the other people going to site, doing site visits on the site teams to make sure they're doing everything safely and can do it themselves. So we act as like a coaching kind of person for them as well. Yeah, so, and it's honestly, it's allowed us to continually improve the safety culture within the operation, and that's within our company and out on site. We can gather evidence for incident investigation really easy, which is tying in with what this webinar is all about, because it's so easy to just pick out like the daily risk assessment, the permits, start and end of day photos, competency records, safety communication briefing confirmations, site visit history, and it's just all there in one place. So it's making the people investigating incidents, yeah, it's just making their lives a lot easier. And most of the time they come to me for it anyway. So yeah, we use the system to create a better root cause analysis kind of system. We used to use Cadence system, which was a bit clunky, didn't quite explain what the actual root causes were. So we've come up with this more accurate and more specific to our business. But yeah, all created on E20 using a form. I present that in leadership meetings, and I've helped our supply chain investigate accidents by using that root cause analysis. Going a bit above and beyond my job role, if I'm honest. It just proves how fundamental the system is and how we've found using the system. I don't know whether anyone wants me to continue. I feel like I've rambled quite a lot.
If I can just put over, I could just cut across that. You know, thanks actually very much, Abby. One of the things that Abby's done, which is very, very cool and relevant, to this. She's produced a performance lead of all of their subcontractors, which I've never seen anyone else do. And it is that is an interesting tool for behavioral change and so on. It is an interesting way of using the system. But I think we'll leave it there, folks. Thanks very much, and we'll pass it back to those. The check is in the post, Abby, by the way. Thanks.
Thanks.
Craig, thank you ever so much for that. It's really interesting to hear it from sort of people that are at the coalface, I suppose, as it were, in terms of having to deal with live incidents on a day-to-day basis and how you're sort of managing that process. And some of the things, Abigail, you sort of touched on in terms of record management and learning from near misses. I know that we'll come on to some of those subjects in the later round tables that we've got. So I'm pleased that you've raised them now. On that point, as I said, in terms of today, this is the starting point and the first in this series. The next roundtable we have is on 5th of May. You'll notice that they're all on the 5th of the month. In May we're covering the internal investigation, which is a tricky area. It's an area that we often face challenges with in terms of conducting investigations. And the main sort of areas where we will be covering is why bother doing an investigation is often something we get asked. What stages we tend to go through, what we recommend, and importantly, the role of external legal counsel. That there are some really significant advantages of having external counsel come in and conduct the investigation, which we'll go through, and also in terms of mitigation and providing advice to the organisation as a result of findings of those investigations. So that's what we'll be covering on the 5th of May. I would be delighted for as many of you to sign up to that and the subsequent talks as possible. And like I say, this will be culminating in a mock trial 5th of October here at Phil Fisher, which again would be lovely to see as many of you face to face as possible. It will be very interactive. It'll be great fun. It'll also be a very good learning experience. And if you need another reason, there'll also be alcohol at the end of it. Thank you all for joining us on this first one. I don't know if anyone's got any questions or any comments. If you want to drop them into the questions and comments box, I'll do my best again. Or if you just want to come off mute and ask them, more than happy to take them in that way. So if anyone's got anything.
If I could, is that okay, folks?
Yeah, of course.
To pick up on a point that actually Kirsty made and Victoria asked the question of, I'm still seeing clients who have got sort of subcontractors and so on about who is responsible. And what I want to say to them is, oh, it's this or it's that. I mean, what is your stop risk response there? Because who on a complex layered contract, who should be reporting? I want to go back with the definitive, it's that person. And I find it's quite difficult to see who that person is. I mean, there must be a start point in that process.
That's a really good question. I think we get off, Craig, as you know, we get asked that question a lot, especially in very complex contractual scenarios. And it's much easier if we sort of roll back. And what we sort of say is, when clients are getting into those situations and they're contracting with subcontractors or third parties for a big project, is that in terms of health and safety, is if we spend a little bit of time then working out roles and responsibilities, which I know are contained in the contracts, but if it's clear at that stage, and then more importantly, who within that organisation or each organisation has responsibility, and who's going to take the lead on what, I think is absolutely crucial. Because if you've got it decided at the start, or when work's commencing, it's a lot easier having that conversation then and agreeing on who's responsible for what, then 12 months later when you're dealing with a serious incident or a fatality, when you'll have parts of the organisation who will want to be very much involved, and then you'll have parts of the organisation who are running down the road just trying to get away from it. So we often say having that agreed, up front is a much better approach. If we're coming into an incident and there are discussions going on about who's responsible for what, who should be doing what, then we will often have to sort of say to our client, look, this is our view, this is who needs to be doing A, B, and C. But that process can take up time, and it can waste time in that incident. And my view is, if that's agreed up front, it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier for us, and it's a lot more beneficial for the clients as well.
I think we could probably add something to that, actually, Andrew, that if this isn't just about incident response, but organisations may come to us for a refresh or a review of their health and safety policy, and it's at that point they may not even be thinking about an incident and any protocol, but it's at that point we may flag to them, well, we can see you have this policy, but what actually happens on the ground when you bring in subcontractors, or do you look at their risk assessments? We ask those quite probing questions on, what's the discrepancy between theory and practice? Because you can have a great policy, and we tend to find that there are multiple policies sometimes, and employees don't know which one's in use, and the document management piece isn't quite there. So on the advisory side of what we do, it's saying, well, we can think ahead here, and actually there's potentially going to be some confusion that can creep in. So I think it's always worth reviewing on a regular basis. Okay, what are our policies? Are they interacting with other policies? Are they, does everything make sense? And let's be honest, sometimes it's not always the most glamorous of areas, is it, health and safety? But when it goes wrong, that's when, and that's what obviously we'll want to avoid. So yeah, looking at things in advance of awful things happening is never a bad idea.
Absolutely. And Andy's put a comment in the questions box saying how great Craig is, so another plug. But yeah, no. But yeah, it's really important. So yeah, has anyone else got any more questions or anything else they wanted to raise? What I should say is that if anyone's got any points they want to bring up afterwards, more than happy for you to email us. We will be sharing these slides afterwards, so you'll have a copy of these, and any member of the team is more than happy to deal with anything. But if there isn't anything else, like I say, please register for the events coming up. Also, we have a podcast series on health and safety matters, which is coming out fairly soon. We've recorded a couple of episodes already. You would be glad to hear you won't just be hearing a bunch of lawyers talking about health and safety legislation. What it's bringing people who have got a particular story to tell in the health and safety world, whether they've been involved in incidents, or whether they've had a career in health and safety, and it's us sitting down with them and sort of learning as much from them, more than anything else, I think. So that series will be coming out soon. So please feel free to listen to that, and any comments on that would be great. If there's no more questions, thank you to both my colleagues, Christine and Kirsty, for presenting today. Thank you to everyone for listening. It's much appreciated, especially the numbers that have turned up, which is great. And we look forward to seeing you at the next one, and we're also leading mock trial in October. Thank you, everyone.